How's everybody doing out there? Well, now that we've talked about the measures of location and being able to figure out exactly where a certain number lives, whether it's the 10th percentile, 25th, 90th, 80th, doesn't matter. So now what we want to focus on is really just the center. Where is the actual measure of center of the data? Where is the absolute center? And so we did one of these already. So if you notice, the median was actually one way of measuring the center. And if you notice, it's actually on our little list here of one of the three measures of center that we're going to use. So technically, we've already calculated the median, so we should know how to do that. So the two new ones that we want to talk about are going to be our mean or our average and the mode. So our mean or average is just like what you would probably imagine. So what we're going to do is we take all of our data sets, add them up, divide by the total number of elements that's there. And so what we've got is we've got two different means that we're talking about in this case. So we've got an X with a line over it here. And so this one is what's called our sample mean. So again, this is going to be a statistic, just to kind of remind you, because it's the mean that we're getting from our data that we actually collected ourselves. It's going to be our sample data. And so this is going to be our sample mean, where the one that has the mu, so this is the Greek letter mu, and so this is going to be our population mean. And so this would be our parameter. And so again, not very likely that we're going to know the whole entire population, so it's very rare that we're going to actually calculate the population mean by hand. So for the most part, what we're going to usually do is use our sample mean. But if you notice, there's really no difference between the two formulas other than a small n and a capital N. But other than that, they're the same. All right, so if you haven't seen some of these symbols before, so this sigma, so this is the Greek letter capital sigma, what this means in math terms, it means to sum. So what this is saying is basically just sum all of the data elements, or add them together, and then divide by the total number of elements. And so that's how we're going to calculate our average. And I'm going to show you kind of a quicker way too as well. All right, so our median, so again, we talked about this in the last section, but if you notice, this formula looks a little bit different, but in fact, it is actually the same as our index formula. So if we remember, our median was a percentile of 50. So if we think about this in terms of our formula k equals 50, and we use our index formula from the previous section, so k divided by 100 all times n plus 1, then if we substitute 50 for k, we're going to get 50 over 100 equals n plus 1. But if you throw in your calculator, 50 over 100 is the same thing as 1/2 times n plus 1. And if you basically just throw that n plus 1 times 1 on the top, gives us the following formula. So this just gives us a nice, quick shorthand way to calculate where that index is. But then again, we'll still do the same thing. If n plus 1 divided by 2 is a whole number, then that number exactly would be our median. If n plus 1 divided by 2 is a decimal, then we'd have to round down and round up and calculate our average that way. Or now that we've used the one bar stats, we can find our median that way as well. But all right, so finally, the last thing we want to talk about, and so this is the least useful of all the measures of center. So technically, when we're going to be talking about measures of center, we're really going to be looking for the mean and the median, because those are going to be the two most accurate measures of centers that we're going to use. The mode is interesting, but there can be sets of data where the mode isn't necessarily in the middle. So that's, again, one of the reasons that mode's not very popular way of measuring the center. And so the idea is the mode is just looking at the number that occurs the most in a set of data. Or if we were talking about a histogram, it'd be the highest bar in the histogram. So, but the downside about modes is sometimes you can have more than one number that's exactly the same. So if that happens to happen, your set of data would be called bimodal. But technically, you could have three numbers that actually all have the same, same number of data elements. So that would be like trimodal. And technically, if it went further and further and further, you could call it multimodal. And so the fact that you can have multiple right answers for the mode is another reason this really isn't that going to be useful for us in terms of calculating the measure of center, which is what we're interested in. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in and talk about how to calculate these different guys. So for example one, we've got a bunch of test scores that were of classes that were held during the evening are as follows. And we want to try to find the mean, the median, and the mode for these. So let's go ahead, since we haven't done mode yet, and that's probably the one that's the most unusual for us, let's look at that first and see what our mode would be. So what we're doing is we're scanning through our list trying to see what numbers occur more often than others. So I see I've got a few 98s here. I've got a 98, a 98. I've got three 98s. And so based on what I'm looking at, I don't see anything that has more of those. So with this one, it looks like our mode is going to be 98. Now, if we were calculating our mean, so remember what we'd want to do is take all these numbers, add them up, and then I think there's 20 scores total. So we would divide by 20. So we would take like 98 plus 78 plus 68 plus 83 plus 81 plus 89 plus 88 plus 76 plus 65 plus 45, and just keep going. And then eventually divide all this by 20. So, but I don't want you to get tortured all the time with this kind of stuff. So I'm going to show you a trick little or tip that we can do. And it's using one of the calculator commands that we've already worked on. So if I flip over to my calculator real quick. So again, first thing you want to do is make sure that you entered all that data into your list if you haven't done so already. So again, just so I don't bore you guys, I've put all this into list 1 already, so it's all ready to go. So what I want to do now is go back to our main menu, hit Stat, go to Calc, and so what we're going to do is use our 1-bar stats again. So if I click my 1-bar stats, in this case my data was in list 1, so I'm going to hit list 1, close my parentheses, and hit Enter. And so we did this, I think, already. So, and that's how I guess the 5-number summary was given last time to us. But if you notice on the right-hand side is our 5-number summary from that problem. And for yours, it'll be the bottom numbers that you have. So the mean is actually going to be, if you remember, we use that X bar notation to represent the mean. So that 78.9 is actually going to be our sample mean for this set of data. So that X bar gives us our mean right away. So if we click on go back, we can see that our X bar is going to be our 78.9. And then again, with our median, since we have our 5-number summary, we can use that to figure out what our median is. So if we go back to the calculator, again, 1-bar stats calculated it for us, so we can see our median is 82. So we can write down our median. So unfortunately, if you notice, there was no mode on the calculator, so that's one of the things that you will have to do by hand. So we can do mean and median, all that kind of stuff on the calculator, but mode, the only way to do it is by physically kind of looking at the calculator, or looking at the set of data and kind of calculating it. Now, if you have your list ordered from lowest to highest, it is going to make calculating that mode much easier because you can go through and easily count. Or if you have the frequency distribution, you'll be able to calculate it that way as well. So kind of keep that in mind. All right, so that's our mean, median, and mode. And so as you can see, even though both of these, or all three of these numbers are supposed to represent the center of our sets of data, you can see that they're fairly different. You know, each one of them is a little bit different looking. Now the mean and the median aren't particularly off by a whole lot, so but they are a little bit different. But you can see our mode is just, you know, nowhere near the middle. I mean, 98 is definitely not the middle of this set of data, and so again, this is just a terrible way to measure the center with this set of data. Now, sometimes the mode does do a good job, but this is a good example that kind of shows where the mode can get totally off track and have really nothing to do with the center at all. So our mean and our median are pretty close together, and really the reason they're different, if you remember, this is the problem that we did talking about those outliers, is if we think about the way the average is calculated, the average takes all 20 of these values, adds them up, and then divides by the total. So that 25 and 45 that really wasn't kind of representative of the rest of the data is still getting thrown into the average. And the fact that they were on the low end is what kind of pulled that mean to the left. It's kind of what pulled that, you know, down from kind of 82 closer to that 78.9. So outliers can affect the mean. So that's a big thing to remember. So the median, the nice thing is, because all it does is just lines the numbers up lowest to highest, figures out the location of the middle, and so it's just going to be what it is. The outliers don't affect the median or anything like that. And so the median is unaffected by outliers. So if you're ever in a situation where you have to decide, is the mean my better choice or is the median the better choice, that's what you're going to think about. Are there outliers in my data? And if there are outliers, then the mean is not going to be the best representation of the center, the median will. Technically, if there's no outliers, the mean and the median are going to be pretty close together, and in that case you could kind of choose either one of them and you'll end up with a pretty accurate result in each of those cases. But all right, so let's talk about the next example here. So in this case, we're trying to find the mean, median, and mode from a frequency table. So in this case, like the easiest thing to find from our frequency table is going to be our mode. That's the absolute easiest thing, because what we do is we just kind of scan the list, look to see which number occurs the most, and that's going to be our mode. So with this one, if we notice, there's 5 75s, and 5 is the biggest frequency that occurs on our list. So our mode is just 75 and we're done. So that's kind of a nice, easy piece of cake. Now median, we've calculated median using a frequency table before, but I'm going to show you a different way that you can do it this time. Now from the mean perspective, if we were to calculate this mean using by hand, then what we'd want to do is we'd want to kind of recognize that this frequency says that there's 3 68ths. So what this would look like is I'd have to do like 3 times 68 plus 2 times 71 plus 5 times 75 plus 3 times 77 plus 4 times 83, and then finally plus 3 times 89. And then we'd want to divide by the total number of elements altogether. So if we add up our frequency, we've got 5, 10, 13, 17, 20. And so we could just divide that by 20, and that would easily find our mean for us, and we'd be good to go. So, but I want to show you another way that you can do this using our calculator. And so, but this one we have to do kind of a little bit of a trick to it. So with this one, since we have 2 sets of data, we've got a score column and a frequency column, then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use 2 different lists to actually write in our table. So I used list 1 for the previous example. So for this one, I'm going to use the score to be list 2 and the frequency to be list 3. And so what I'm going to do is type those into the calculator, and then we're still going to use the 1var stats, but we have to do one little modification to it. So let me go back to the calculator real quick. And so again, if I go to stat and edit, notice list 2 and list 3 already has the data in there, because again, I didn't want to bore you by typing it in. So now, let's go back to the main screen. Hit stat, calc, 1var stats. But in this case, since I've got 2 lists that I'm actually working with, I'm going to have to actually enter both of them here. So I'm going to have to hit list 2 and then comma, which is above the number 7, list 3. And then hit enter. And so notice I still get a nice little 5-number summary with my list 2, list 3 in this case. And so I can see that my median is 76, and then my mean again is the X with the little line over it, so 77.55 is going to be my sample mean for this set of data. Now again, you could calculate this by hand, but I'm just kind of showing you some calculator things that you can do as well. So let me transfer these over to the packet. So our mean was 77.5, and our median was 76. Let me check just to make sure I got those right. 77.55, sorry. And then 76 for our median. All right, and so if we look, this data is a lot nicer. So notice that all these numbers are much, much closer together. The mean still a little bit bigger than the median. The mode's just a hair underneath the median. But these numbers are much, much closer together. And when you have a situation like this, where the mean, median, and mode are pretty close to each other, this is going to tell us that our data is pretty symmetric. So it may not be exactly symmetric, but it's closer to symmetric than kind of skewed one way or the other. And we're going to talk about more of that in the next section as well. But all right, so I've got a bunch of practice problems for you guys to work on. So practice 1 is different. So we haven't used this set of data yet. So if you want to use the calculator on this, I'd recommend using your list 4 and list 5, since you've already got data in list 1, list 2, and list 3, hopefully. And those are coming up in practice 2, practice 3, and practice 4 for these guys. So if you have any questions, just send me a message through the chat. Otherwise, good luck, and I'll see you at the next video.